The sound of horse hooves fades from the stone brick walls of Kota Gede. An entourage trails behind an ornate carriage. Yet there is no celebration. Panembahan Hanyokrawati, ruler of a rising inland kingdom, is dead, taken by an injury from a hunting accident. On his deathbed, he names Raden Mas Rangsang, son of his second royal wife, as successor, as the crown prince Martapura is deemed unfit to rule. This decision was born out of necessity, yet it will reshape Java. 3 centuries earlier, the Hindu-Buddhist Majapahit Empire had defeated the armies of Kublai and unified the archipelago. Its god kings ruled the immensely wealthy region the size of Europe. But that unity had long since dissolved. In its place stood an ever-shifting patchwork of rival courts, each guarding its own power at the whims of strong men. Here the old and the new intertwined, as remnants of Hindu-Buddhist states compete with the expanding power of Islamic kings, while the increasing influence of the Portuguese and Dutch empires sunk its teeth deeper. Polities rise and fall in mere decades. Indeed, Mas Rangsang was born into one such polity. Only 7 years before his birth, his grandfather, Panembahan Senopati, had rebelled and carved out a new power from this fractured landscape. He founded Mataram, an inland Islamic kingdom with a bold ambition to unite Java under a single ruler. That ambition would define Mas Rangsang. Even as a boy, he stood out, sharp-minded, strong-willed, not first in line, but already seen as more than a prince, a ruler in the making. With his father's death, that future arrived sooner than expected. Thus the throne passed to Raden Mas Rangsang, and he ascended as Susuhunan Anyakakusuma. In time, he would be known as Sultan Agung, the Great Sultan. Hey, people of Mataram, witness that Raden Mas Rangsang has ascended the throne, succeeding his father with the title His Majesty Sultan Agung Senopati Engalogong Abdurrahman. Any man in Mataram who is dissatisfied with this or who will not obey, let him now express his intention. I will fight him in battle. Crowned at 20, one of his first acts as king was to move the capital from his birthplace of Kota Gede to Karta. From here, he would lay a foundation for what he intended to build. His first year was spent asserting his rule in front of his vassals. As in the ever-shifting tides of Java's politics, rebellion is not uncommon. Thus far, the nobles have heeded the calls of the new sultan, their fealty towards the holy king and God's vice-regent on earth renewed. The Mataram heartland is secure. The sultan can now look outside. He turned his gaze eastward, where the horizon shimmered with rival powers. For decades, these ports had resisted Mataram's expansion, forming a loose confederation of wealthy trading cities centered on Surabaya. It was no mere city. Surabaya was the beating heart of a maritime world that reached far beyond Java. Its harbors teemed with ships projecting power along coasts and across seas. It commanded alliances, controlled outposts, and drew in foreign merchants, weapons, and spices through vast trading networks. In the Sultan's eyes, this reach made it a dangerous rival. Surabaya could arm itself with imported weapons, endured long sieges, and even funnel support into factions within Mataram, stirring unrest from within. It stood as the strongest coastal power on Java. As long as Surabaya and its allies endured, Mataram's claim to the island could never be complete. Surotani, you march against eastern Java. Take all the troops from Mataram and my kinsmen with you and lead them to war. A Mataram army led by Sultan Agung himself had just successfully conquered Wirasaba. This small fortified town is strategically placed southwest of Surabaya and its allies, a foothold from which the Sultan could stage his attacks against the east. Such brazen action alarmed Adipati Jayalengkara, ruler of Surabaya. For 12 years under Sultan Agung's father, Mataram had been crippled by internal rebellions and posed little threat to Surabaya or its allies. That seemed to be the case no more. Jayalenkara moved swiftly. He summoned his allies, and the banners of Tuban, Lasem, Pasuruan, Gresik, and other coastal states gathered in Surabaya. They have been chased. Now it is time for them to do the chasing. The decision was clear. A united Surabayan coalition would strike Mataram with force and punish this insolence. In the dry season of 1616, the coalition departed, some 30,000 strong. They sought to march over 200 miles and inflict a decisive blow to crush the rising power of Mataram once and for all. Surabaya had defeated Mataram kings before. Now they would punish the audacity of the young 23-year-old Sultan Agung, just like they did with his grandfather and father before him. The land burned as the coalition advanced westward along the northern coast, striking first at Mataram-aligned Pati, before turning sharply south into the interior. Their movement was swift and unopposed. Though supplies were already running thin, the Surabayan commanders pressed forward, determined to reach their objective before resistance could fully gather. Within days, they had pushed deep into Mataram territory. War drums and gongs echoed across the fields as their banners rose over the horizon near Siwalan, a small village only 40 miles east of Kota Gede and the beating heart of Sultan Agung's reign. Here they expected to join forces with the treacherous Adipati of Pajang, whose betrayal would open the way to strike the capital. But as they approached, the scene before them was not what they had anticipated. Instead of an allied host, a vast Mataram encampment already stood waiting on the western side of Siwalan. The coalition halted, their advance suddenly checked. Confusion spread through the ranks as they realized the Sultan's army had arrived ahead of them. Thus, they made camp on the eastern side, uncertain but still expecting the Adipati of Pajang to appear, unaware that he was already in the Sultan's grasp. Weeks earlier, Sultan Agung had been warned of the expedition by a spy within the Surabayan court. His fears were confirmed when the ruler of Pati appeared before him, reporting of a large Surabayan army. Acting quickly, he gathered his forces and marched east to intercept the coalition before it could reach his capital. Sultan Agung was aware of the treacherous plan of the Adipati of Pajang and thus had camped near Siwalan, anticipating the enemy. For days, the two armies faced one another across the fields, neither side advancing. Sultan Agung understood that the Surabayan coalition would be larger and superior in equipment, as these trade cities would have better access to gunpowder weapons. To face such an army head-on would be too much risk. He would need to hatch a plan. His Majesty the Sultan ordered Tumenggung Martoloyo to go around the camp of the enemy, encircle it from afar, and block the troops from eastern Java who were out foraging. Thus, he dispatched one of his best generals, and Martoloyo's cavalry set off to the rear, burning crops and harassing the foraging coalition men, denying them from supplies. The unfamiliar woods and plains of inner Java meant that they could not intercept the fast ambushes of Martoloyo. As days go by, each foraging party sent would not come back intact. Some did not come back at all. Soon, hunger and sickness gripped the coalition men. The longer they wait, the more the odds will turn on Mataram's favor. Jayalenkara had to do something. In the grey hush before dawn, Surabayan drums shattered the silence of the small village. Thousands surged from narrow streets between the houses, flooding toward the Mataram encampment. The long-awaited assault had begun. Yet to Jayalenkara's surprise, Sultan Agung's army was ready and waiting. Cries of men swallowed the clash of spears. Matchlocks and arquebuses thundered, their smoke choking the air as bodies collided in a violent crush. The smaller but better supplied Mataram line held. Steel and bullets caught the attackers as the Surabayans hurled themselves forward in a desperate gamble. Then, from the rear, Martoloyo's cavalry struck, swift, merciless, cutting into an army already locked in struggle. Starved and outmatched, the Surabayans broke. They scattered, abandoning their camp and its fearsome weapons to the victors. Agung's design had unfolded exactly as intended. By starving his enemy and forcing their hand, he shattered the great Surabayan coalition. Their defeat was devastating. The coastal cities would not soon raise another force to rival Mataram. The tide had turned, and Sultan Agung would not let it turn back. In a matter of 3 years, through a series of campaigns, all of the coalition cities except Surabaya itself stood under the Mataram banner. Lasem in 1616, Pasuruan in 1618, and Tuban in 1619. By 1620, Sultan Agung's army had eliminated the coalition. Surabaya now stood alone on land, cut off and surrounded. Yet it was far from defenseless. Though isolated inland, it remained a formidable coastal power, its fleets still commanding the seas, its harbors open to the wider world, and its walls and army hardened by years of war. It was not a city that would simply yield. The siege of Surabaya had begun. Sultan Agung now stood closer than any ruler before him to conquering the city that his grandfather and father had failed to break. It would prove to be one of his costliest campaigns, testing his wit and strategies to the very limit. Everything in this channel, including its artwork, content, research, and editing, is done by a single person and uses no AI. If you'd like to see me make more content like this, you can help me by subscribing.